Everyday Resonance does not provide psychotherapy or medical services and is not a substitute for these services. If you have or may have a psychological or medical condition, please see a licensed professional. Hey everyone, I'm Priya.
Hi, and I'm Daniel, and you're watching Everyday Resonance, where we look at how we can align with our highest self in the world, just in the face of the ups and downs of what the world brings. And Priya, what do we focus on this program?
Everything in the human experience, from love to sex, relationships, work, spirituality, friendships, you name it, and I hope that we cover it.
Yeah, lots of great topics. And today we have a great guest. We're in the midst of focusing on love resonance, and right now the topic is conscious relationships. And actually, we're just so grateful to have Briana MacWilliam with us today. We're about to go live with her to ask her some questions around what, Priya? What are we talking with Briana about today?
Such a powerful topic today on different attachment styles, and if you don't know what they are, please stay tuned and maybe learn a little bit about yourself, perhaps partners, or even those that you have had relationships with in the past.
Yeah, and so why don't you go ahead and introduce Briana?
Yeah, so we are so excited to have Briana MacWilliam here today. She is an author, educator, and licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist with 13 years of experiences in the field. She uses a psycho-spiritual approach and helps adults struggling with insecure attachment go from feeling fearful and confused to confident and self-sovereign in their romantic relationships using creative arts interventions. She has co-authored 2 books on the subject, and currently she is the director for continuing education for Pratt Institute's Creative Arts Therapies Department, where she teaches personality development and thesis research. So glad to have her. She's going to be joining us via Skype today. Briana, thank you so much.
Hi, Briana. Hi, good to see you. So glad you're with us today.
Hi there. Can you hear me? I just unmuted myself.
Yes,
we can hear you.
There you
Yeah,
are.
Great. And so, I'll also say, along with the intro, that you should definitely check out her YouTube channel. If you just,
I know you have.
Yeah, that's right. So I've gained a lot from the wisdom that she shares on attachment styles on YouTube, and we're so grateful to have you on, Briana. So, we were going to begin with just asking you to share an overview of relationship attachment styles, and we can start from there. So let's hear just an overview of the topic.
Well, sure. So just to provide a basic definition, attachment is an instinctual biopsychosocial drive to bond with and remain in close proximity to a caregiver in order to survive. So the nature of the bonding that evolves between a child and a caregiver is said to kind of create a blueprint for our later relationships in adulthood. And so this blueprint is kind of like a love map or a filter through which we tend to interpret our love relationships. And you might call this map or this filter your attachment style. And so there are 4 different attachment styles, one of which we refer to as secure attachment, and then there are 3 insecure attachment styles which manifest in a particular fashion.
Okay, so I heard you basically say the experience of attachment forms really young.
So yes, so there is some debate in terms of we do have attachments that form when we're very young. However, our attachment styles can evolve over time, and you can have a circumstance in which maybe you started off having one particular attachment style, but due to circumstances and or the attachment style of your partners, they can change.
And so I think either way, if it's impacting us from a young age or as we're growing older, it's an inner experience related to, let's say, trauma or patterning, that with focus, with becoming aware of it, with effort, we can start to impact that experience. And also, the more that we're able to be conscious of it or communicative of it in relationship, we can also start to work with these attachment styles in a way that can shift them so that we can be more effective.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So one of the things that we've been focusing on, we started focusing on last week, was this concept of conscious relationships. How important is it to be aware of your attachment style if you are desiring to be in a conscious relationship?
So maybe it would help to perhaps outline a couple of the basic attachment
Oh,
styles and
sure.
then address that, because I think as I talk about them, it might become more apparent why
Yeah.
it would be important to know. I had mentioned secure attachment. So this is sort of when individuals are more comfortable with intimacy in their relationships and they feel like they can kind of more fluidly move through states of separateness and togetherness without fears of being abandoned or smothered. And I refer to these individuals as cornerstones. And then we have anxious attachment. And this is when you have someone who's really preoccupied with their romantic relationships and they struggle with the fear of abandonment and rejection most of the time. And they cope with that by people pleasing, and they have a tendency to kind of overgive as a way to try to secure their relationships. And I refer to these as open hearts. Um, then we have people who have a tendency towards what's called avoidance. So they're less likely to, or they're more likely to feel threatened by closeness and intimacy. And so they tend to prioritize their personal freedom above everything else. And so their fear is more of being smothered or controlled or invaded upon in a relationship. And so they tend to insert a lot of distance between themselves and a partner to prevent that from happening. And I refer to them as rolling stones. And lastly, there is Mary Main included an attachment style called disorganized attachment. And sometimes it's referred to as fearful avoidance or anxious avoidance. And that means that these individuals experience a very intense internal conflict over wanting closeness and intimacy while at the same time fearfully avoiding it. And so usually individuals who have this kind of attachment style, they have some form of unresolved, incidental, chronic, or developmental trauma in their life. And I refer to them as spice of lifers. So the benefit of knowing about attachment styles is that if we can become conscious of what parts of ourselves are being activated, and we can have a sense of how our behaviors, thoughts, and feelings are being organized in a way that is reflecting more or less our unconscious automation, then it's kind of like stabbing your finger on a map and then figuring out where you want to go from there, right?
It's like
If we
roadmap.
can, exactly, kind of like a roadmap or like the love map that I was talking about
Yeah.
before.
You know, as you were going through descriptions of those attachment styles, I had considered myself to be one. And then as you were going through them, I saw myself in a few of them.
Mhm.
Is it a possibility that people go in between, or in between two different kind, or could you be more than one at the same time? Is that a possibility?
Yes.
As far
So
as the insecure part goes.
sure. So there are a lot of self-help and personal development books that have come out over the past couple decades that talk about attachment styles in the way I just described them, which is categorically. But the more that you learn about this and the more you talk to people, and like I have a Facebook group of over 3,000 people, and the more that we hear people talking about these things anecdotally, the more we realize it's much more dimensional
Okay.
than this. And that there are spectrums along which we experience these things. So in terms of how changeable is it, how flexible are we, there is some neurological research that suggests we may have a genetic predisposition towards a particular attachment style. In essence, this is like saying temperament plus social conditioning equals attachment style, or said another way, nature plus nurture equals how we love our partners. And, that's not really a new concept. We've
Right.
just found better ways of explaining it. So, when we are able to look at images of our brain and say, oh, when I'm preoccupied with my partner, that's the part that lights up. And when I look at how anxiously I respond in other situations, that part lights up as well. That helps us to kind of define the what that we are experiencing, but not necessarily the why. And I don't mean the why that takes us on a treasure hunt into the past, but like the why of why am I experiencing this now? And what does it all mean in the broader context of my life?
I have a question. So let's see, there's often people referring to just reoccurring patterns like, oh, not this again kind of thing in relationship. Actually, pre-show, there was somebody that brought this question up. If you could talk about attachment style in the context of reoccurring challenges in relationship, maybe it might be different relationships or the same relationship. Be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, so there's a couple different approaches you can take to that. If we are to stick with the more psychological slash scientific, neuroscientists say that neurons that fire together wire together. It's just as simple as that. We repeat what we know. It's kind of like a broken record. But, psychodynamic theorists are a bit more poetic about it. It is, we want to relive in the hopes of revising our old wounds. But I would ask, well, what part of us hopes? And so that's the part that leads us into the connection to conscious relationship, and that's kind of how attachment leads us into expanding into conscious relationships, because consciousness is all about assuming this kind of observer position in our internal worlds as much as our external world. But a lot of us persist in an external orientation until something cataclysmic happens in our lives, and that forces us to take a personal inventory.
Right.
And of course, nothing forces our hand like heartbreak.
Ah, this is true.
And so,
This is true.
That's right.
This is true.
And so the best way to take a self-inventory in the hopes of changing those patterns that you were talking about and wanting to really change the relationship to who you might be on the inside is to look at the current patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior. And, that's what I refer to as your automation.
And so so it sounds like maybe you're referring to a first step. And on Everyday Resonance, we look at the first step of kind of working towards intentionally impacting our inner being so that we can resonate in alignment with our highest self. The first step is awareness. And the first step of awareness is becoming aware that we are responsible for our inner activity. And so would you agree with that? I mean, is that some, in relation to attachment style, would you say first, like, oh, I take responsibility for what I'm bringing into my life and into this relationship. And then from there, maybe there's additional awareness or additional steps. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I would agree with that. And it actually reminds me of a question that I often get, which is, how can I make this work? Or is it ever possible for an anxious and avoidant partnership to last?
Yeah.
Or, now I've learned all this amazing stuff about attachment and I want a conscious relationship. And so, but my partner is resistant, or my partner doesn't want to go there with me. And so is it toxic and unhealthy for me to stay in this relationship if they're not willing to meet me where I'm at?
And what is your answer to that? So, and I want to rephrase the question just slightly, which
Sure.
is, if one partner is interested in the self-reflection, and then also then the let's say
Joint
trauma
healing.
resolution related to the inner patterning stuckness, but the other is not, the other won't even really go inward. Is that an equation that you can work with?
So yes, and it's a big question. I think that there are sort of three underlying parts to it that I would break down. And the first would be, you thus have to kind of define consciousness versus unconsciousness. You would need to address this notion that love is equated with need satisfaction. And lastly, you would have to kind of reframe the question in a more positive light. So
Please tell me that love is equated with need satisfaction. I really need to hear that that's a big yes.
I'm gonna have to say
I don't see her signing off on that. Really don't see her signing off on that.
Yeah.
But I won't say
it's
it
something I've
can't
been learning that it's not. Okay, and yeah, go ahead.
I won't say that it can't be,
Right.
but it need not be. And I think sometimes we feel like we get tied up in the need satisfaction. And if you can't meet my needs, then I can't love you. And it's almost that it's not even the lack of the needs being met that disrupts us and upsets us so much. It's that, I can't love you anymore. And I will incur the judgment of my family and friends and everyone that I've complained to over the past 6 months about you if I do continue to love you, and they will tell me I am in a toxic relationship if I love you. So it's kind of like, if we're defining consciousness as an ability to assume that observer position in the internal as much as external world, then we are essentially defining consciousness as a measure of free will. And so that is, we are choosing
Choice,
how
yes.
to respond in any given situation. So I want to clarify that this is not to say that you learn how to control your feelings, or that you learn how to not have needs, or that you learn that you can meet your needs in every situation and thus you have no attachment needs whatsoever. You don't need to be in relationship to anybody else. It's really more about learning how to be in relationship to your needs such that you allow for them without being pushed around by them. So if your feelings are like water, and it's not going to behoove you in a storm to wall up the dam, but rather to open up a channel enough so that the lands around you don't get flooded. And so, it's futile to try to control the storm, but it's a benefit to build a strong channel.
That's absolutely right. Like I know for myself, just I feel like I'm learning emotions for the first time in these past 3 years of not holding them in or numbing them out. And now what I'm starting to realize is to allow for the feelings to be there and then make choices from that space of recognizing them and awareness with them. Even in the context of like a partner, how do I bring myself when things I would have normally not communicated or things
Mhm.
that I would have kept quiet about.
Mhm.
How am I meeting my needs, which I know now is to actually communicate them, right? While honoring emotions. And it's hard work.
Mm.
It's hard work.
It gets easier.
Yeah, over time, over time,
Yeah.
and the work is joyful. I don't want to make it seem that it's not, because what you said was it's free will, and nothing is more beautiful than feeling free in your mind, body, and spirit. And
Right.
so,
So, and Brianna, it sounds like when you talked about the dam and being able to kind of let the water out in some sort of managed way, I
Mhm.
really like that as it relates to this question of like, what is secure attachment? Like, what is
Mhm.
healthy attachment? So maybe we could start there. Let's start walking down the path a little further. We can start with the healthy side of the equation or the secure side of the equation.
Sure.
Could you
Sure.
describe that more? Let's go into that a little further.
Yes. So I can talk about it in a million different ways, but I
Sure.
think what I'll start with is the present moment. We can talk about what it looks like in childhood and how that evolves into adulthood, which, in a nutshell, is basically to say that you received regard and you had parents who were attuned to your needs, and you were able to explore the boundaries of your comfort zones with enough support that you felt like you were able over time to build enough internalized symbols and cognitive constructs that as an adult, you start to understand what is and is not an appropriate emotional investment in something. But if that got tied up in conditions of worth, which is to say that you were only given love and regard when you did certain things to get them, this is where we start getting that need satisfaction gets equated with love kind of stuff. So to be in a conscious relationship, and let's, for the purposes of this discussion, say relationship is a secure relationship, is to hold a loving position regardless of where your partner may be in their process. So I love you because I am love, and nothing you could say or do would detract from what value I find in you and what I find lovable about you, or what I find valuable or lovable about me. So if I were to say I cannot grow unless my partner grows, and continuing to love them is unhealthy and holding me back,
that's
then
not
you're actually
conscious.
still in an unconscious
Yeah.
position, as we are defining it, and you are equating love with need satisfaction. But this is the thing, like that's okay too, because that's where you are in your process, and
Yeah.
that's information that's worth investigating, right?
Sure.
So
What a beautiful way of information worth investigating.
that.
Yeah, and related to that, the scenario could be though where both partners are insecure, and I think Brianna, as you see time and time again, it takes a lot of time to resolve the inner patterning that leads to secure, and so maybe one of the insecure partners says, "Look, I realize my internal state is either anxious that you're going to leave, or maybe wanting to avoid intimacy, and therefore I want to work on it. I want to work on it myself, and then in the context of relationship, and potentially the other one is. So I would say that's being conscious, but yet they're not healed yet. They're not necessarily in a place where they're able to work in a secure way with these patterns. Whereas the other person then says like, oh well, I don't feel that I have any issue around this and I'm fine and I don't want to work on it. So that would be kind of like an imbalance of one partner saying no and the other one saying yes. Um, you
Well,
know,
it's not quite, it's actually the same thing,
Yeah.
because you're saying you're not conscious, there's something not right, we need to work on this in order for this to be better.
huh.
So you've set up in a relationship of
Anxious
A to
avoidant.
B, and you're examining the distance between A to B, and you're saying not right, not right, not right, not right. I need this thing to happen before I can feel like this is what I deserve,
Yep.
or before I can feel like I'm getting what I want, or before I can feel like XYZ.
So,
And that's not any different than how we are describing an unconscious way of being, which we would have to explain on the other end of that as be lacking in free will, which is to say that we're operating from a place of automation. So my happiness is dependent upon my external circumstances. And you just kind of voiced aloud that same premise with pretty words and insight attached to it.
That's interesting. Just a little bit more down that path, because I feel like actually it's, I think in like there's so many anxious or there's so many insecure people in the world. There are many secure as well. So from the insecure place, the act of starting to say like, okay, I like choosing to acknowledge it and then starting to look inward consciously at the patterns that are arising. To me, that's an element of consciousness. Now that person's not going to be over this idea of seeking outward or pushing away outward for their own inner security yet, because it takes years that from what I've seen and what I've researched to really get to a place to where that's more functional. But the act of starting to recognize it is what I'm referring to. One person saying, yeah, I can see in the context of our relationship, there are challenges here. I'm not perfect. I have these issues. In fact, it's very difficult for me to get out of it, but I want to try, and I see it. So I thought, that what we agreed on was kind of the first step, but I'm hearing a little differently. Maybe I just described it differently. I'm not sure, but yeah, go ahead.
It's a first step because it's an assessment, right? That's more or less an assessment of where you're at. But then what you recognize in the assessment is you're still, even the person who's saying, I'm looking at this and I want to work on it, just the notion that I need to work on something is sort of a disallowance of what it is, right? So what if what it is in this moment is actually what it is, quote unquote, supposed to be?
Yeah.
And so for example, let's say that we might describe an unconscious thought to be, I cannot be happy unless you do what will make me happy. And if you cannot do what will make me happy, then I cannot love you. And if you do not fulfill my needs, then I have no use for you. You are not lovable to me. And this is kind of like when someone says, well, if I can't have all of you, I'll have none of you. I have enough friends, right? Or similarly, I cannot be happy unless you do what would make me happy. And if only I could make myself good enough, then perhaps I can inspire you to become more of what I would have you be. And if you are not succeeding in what I would have you be, then I must have failed in loving you in some fashion. I must be deficient in some way because you have this power over me, so why don't I have this power over you? Thus, I must remain with you no matter what to prove my unconditional love, because that will make me enlightened, and because only then will I be worthy. And I will finally know my worth when you finally change. And so this is, in essence, a form of bondage. It's kind of an ego attachment, and it gets tied up in the biological attachment. So for another example, here's a reasonable biological attachment need, which might also be an expression of a conscious romantic desire. I would like to meet a partner who enjoys spending time with me, respects me, who likes to share their ideas, and the sex is amazing, right? So here would be an unreasonable example of an unconscious ego-based attachment, which may have evolved from an insecure biological attachment. So I can only be with this person. This person is the one. I just know it. If I can't make this work, then I can't make it work with anybody. Once they leave me, they'll just marry the next person anyway. I better make this work, or I'll either die alone or never meet someone who makes me feel the same way.
These are such
Wow,
stories
so
that we
much there.
tell ourselves. Wow.
Right.
One more time, I wanted to kind of drive home that a conscious or secure, I just want to make sure that I heard this right, is basically two people who are able to, in a romantic relationship, meet each other where they are. So they're meeting their own emotional intelligence, meeting themselves, and saying, I see what's showing up for you and I'm still here.
Yes, that's a great way of putting it.
Nice.
Okay.
Good job, Priya.
Okay.
And so then I want to get to okay, so an anxious and avoidant partnership comes to you for guidance. And, they're dealing with some of this. One person might be saying, hey, I see I have this problem. The other person might say, I'm doing fine. I don't really, care to focus there. So then where do you take them? I'd love to hear that.
Well, first, if the focus is always to try to focus on what is going right. So oftentimes there's an emphasis on what is going wrong, how can we fix this problem, blah, blah, blah. But they're there because something connects them. There's something in the romance and in the poetry of the relationship that has brought these two together. And it is my belief that that when we find ourselves enamored with partners like this, who in essence reflect the mirrored opposite of whatever is in activation within us, it's because we are two sides of the same coin. And so thus, even though we may be struggling with a sense of friction in the relationship, we are in essence finding a sense of more completeness in the engagement with the contrast that you're experiencing. So first, I would actually start from a more positive perspective, which is, what do you love about this person?
Mm-hmm.
What keeps you in it? What brought you into this room? And rather than get into the headspace, which is kind of where we are now, which is, analyzing all of the intellectual content, we might start more with the creative arts
The
based.
gratitude.
Yeah,
It sounded like gratitude, and I didn't want to cut you off because you were just about to dive into. So, creative art therapies. What are those tools? What you were describing to me sounded a lot like gratitude of showing up, and some mindfulness there, and gratitude of what is right.
Yes. So it's creative arts therapies is when we use the body activation and we use creativity as a way to establish kind of a playing field on which you can start to communicate and connect with your partners. Because when we're talking so much, we're using a lot of, our prefrontal cortex and right. And so, but our emotions and where our attachment experiences are felt are primarily in, the limbic part of the brain, which is all about feelings and memories, and both implicit and explicit memory. And, we're trying to connect on a body level. It's insight is one thing, but then feeling differently is something else.
Absolutely.
Right?
So in the context of trauma and trauma recovery, there's been a lot of research shown that implicit and explicit memories show up in the brain and in the body very distorted, or possibly distorted. And in that context, how does one decipher truth? Or do you just allow for whatever is showing up to show up and move from that space of awareness? But at the same time, how do you decipher truth?
So that's a lovely question. Comes up a lot in my
Okay.
online community. And it is, so a lot of times people are looking for, quote unquote, the truth. I'm going to stay with this partner because I believe in truth. They really love me. And the thing is that truth is always in the eye of the beholder. And if you are in a relationship where there is insecure attachments styles activated, and you're like, do I stay in this because in truth they really love me, and if I hold out as long as I possibly can, maybe that potential will come to be realized, and then I will have the happy ending that I really want. It's kind of like the truth isn't the potential. The truth is the dissonance. The truth is the conflict that they are in. And so when we're talking about the truth of something, inevitably you are going to be the narrator of your own truth.
Yeah.
Right.
So Briana, we're coming close to the end of the segment.
So sad. I really
yeah,
enjoyed
totally.
this
There's so much
conversation.
more where we could go, but I want to ask, somebody, let's say in the course of this program, is just starting to learn about attachment styles, and maybe they're starting to think of what they are. What would you say would be really good next steps for them on this path of inner exploration, inner resonance, and really wanting to bring ourselves in the world in the best way possible?
Sure. Well, I can give myself a little plug.
Yes,
Sure,
That's
please
my
do.
YouTube channel.
Yes.
It's
It's
great.
been, so by the way, your YouTube channel has been very, I know Daniel has said, and he told me, it's like he's found a lot of great information on your channel. So know that the work that you're doing is important.
Thank you so much. And I would also give some book recommendations, maybe, if that's useful.
Sure.
What is your
I think,
YouTube channel, by the way? Do you mind? Is it just at Briana
Adult attachment.
MacWilliam?
yes, the name of the channel is Attachment in Adult Relationships, and you can also just search my name and it will pop
Okay.
up. But I think there's a book called Attached. It's a best-selling book by Heller and Levine, and I think it should be distributed as required reading in high school.
Okay.
I would highly recommend that book. I would also recommend a book. It's called Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson. And I would also recommend another book called How to Break Your Addiction to a Person by Dr. Halpern.
I was waiting for Facing Love Addiction by Pia Melody. Is that
Another good one?
Okay,
Another
good.
good one. Yeah.
I was looking at your brain on love.
Yeah.
So your Facebook group that you have, is that open to anyone, or is that specifically people enrolled in your programs?
So the Facebook group I was referring to, it is technically a closed group, but if
Okay.
you just express interest in joining, you can get in.
Oh, okay. Great.
I do have online programs, and for those that decide that they would like to participate in those, we do have then more exclusive groups so that they can participate in a more private discussion.
Are you on Facebook and Instagram as well?
Yes, same thing, just my name, and on both of those
Okay.
platforms.
Wonderful. Well, we've come to the end of the show. Briana, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you.
Really
It was a pleasure.
awesome, great information.
It's a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, if you have
Yeah.
any questions for us or want to comment at all, you can do it, of course, in any of our social media experiences or environments. You can also email us at everydayresonance@gmail.com. Also, if you're interested in sponsoring the program, you can go there as well.
And don't forget, every week, every day, turn into yourself. And then every Wednesday at 12 noon, Everyday Resonance. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.